Yo, my name is PolishLynx and welcome to another episode of Umeda Sky. Let's continue this, rather good story. I understood where I was and I was noticing smaller things and I kept on walking. The streets, the windows, the trees, the texture of the asphalt, the aesthetic of Latin letters. All of these things I started to notice more consciously. I reached the lookout bridge above the central valley. I didn't know what to do. It seemed too surreal to be true. I have seen this very few in a picture in a magazine in Japan, and ever since that visiting Monaco has become my wish. I walked and listened to the buzz around me, the sounds of cars in the distance, the people going by and some construction work. Into that, the light breeze and the rustling trees. The smell of the air, the sweet scent of flowers, and whenever I walked by, the smell of pastry from the shops. I even bought a croissant to see how it tastes. I didn't like it very much, but it wasn't disappointing to me. I have eaten a few in Japan on occasions, and I thought the French ones would be different, but they really weren't. As I walked on, I realized I could be thinking about something like my story about Elisa Immonen. And it all fitted so nicely together. Because she was so rich, no wonder she would also be in Monaco. Perhaps she would have a house here, on a spot in the harbor. In fact, she was a cruise ship builder, and I saw a large ship in the harbor, so she could be here to celebrate a milestone ship. I didn't know how many ships there could be for. Maybe 100 or 1,000. I really didn't know what a good number would be for a mogul. But that wouldn't matter. She would host an evening banquet on that ship, and having written the article about her in Japan, she would remember me and invite me to Monaco for the event. Of course, she would understand that I would also have to turn that into at least a report, but she would be used to that. Let's visit some Monaco. That street looks familiar. Well, I played F1, Formula 1, so maybe that street is used in the racing, I don't know. As I was walking, I thought that perhaps I would be on a walk like this, to enjoy the city before the evening banquet I had the invitation to. And looking at one of the signs, checking my map out here. Can I help you? It would be Elisa. She would wear normal clothes, and because she was not a celebrity, it would be perfectly possible for her to walk around Monaco without being stopped by fans or journalists. She would recognize me, and we'd get into the talk, where I would tell her where I would like to go. The amphitheater. Yeah, I wanted to go along this road, then go down up that other hill and... Yeah, I can join you. Then I'll just go down to the ship. She would say, and it would make perfect sense because that large cruise ship was stationed at the end of the harbor, where the amphitheater was on a hill. It would be simple encounter, by pure coincidence, and Elisa would decide on the spot to go with me. Of course, I had to think about what it would be that would compel her to spend time with me. My English wasn't all that good, so while it was okay to do the interview in Osaka, it probably wasn't good enough to have a proper conversation. Then again, when I was on the Umeda Sky building, I implied that I could speak English a little better than I actually could. And in that scenario, we had a talk before the interview. So it was possible to continue that scenario for me to speak to Elisa. But it wasn't the language I was worried about. The most important question for me, so that I could continue imagining that fantasy was, why would Elisa want to walk with me? I thought about this because I wanted to have an explanation which would make sense even in that made-up story. I did like to think about things that weren't true, like when I was thinking about that scenario where I would be a spy in Europe. But for motivations, I like to know a reason that could be true. And I didn't see one, as I was quickly thinking about it. What could it be that would make a woman like Elisa walk with me to the amphitheater? I didn't know. I guess she could have enjoyed our interview, after all, she has invited me to Monaco. So maybe the interview was somehow memorable or it made her realize something. I would have liked to be able to think she liked me, but that didn't feel realistic. I I would have liked it to feel realistic. But even when I could have rationalized it all by remembering that I sometimes find some women attractive which aren't really considered pretty, I still didn't think like Elisa could have any romantic interest in me. I guess it all felt so stereotypical. I would dream about a romantic relationship with a girl who doesn't exist. Just like my friends were saying as a joke. But it was my vacation and I should be able to think about any scenarios I want. She could like me. It's not completely impossible, and although I haven't yet had any luck with women not having a girlfriend, I didn't think I was inferior. It just seemed very unlikely, and what I really wanted to think about was Elisa herself to continue the story which started on top of the Umeda Sky building. It was Elisa's mood, the certain something that she had on her mind when I imagined her during the interview in Osaka. Maybe she could still be thinking about it, and meeting me, she would be reminded of it once again. Or it could be her birthday, and because of that she could be made more aware of it. Perhaps I inadvertently said something that made her think that, and she was hoping to meet me to ask me about it. That particular idea seemed the most assuming, but I wanted to ask you something. I started to play that idea in my head. It seemed really nice, and it wasn't entirely impossible that I have said something that made her think. Anyone could do that. It's not a quality of the person who says it, it's the person who interprets it a certain way or is inspired by it. So it was alright to go on. I said to myself and continued thinking about a walk through Monaco with Elisa Imonen, the shipbuilding mogul. I didn't quite know what exactly she would say, and truth be told, in none of my fantasies have the conversations been specific. Only very rarely I would think of certain sentences. It was more about the content of the conversations. And in my daydreams, Elisa and I would walk, and slowly she would get to what it was that bothered her. She would remember me asking her about the Umeda Sky building and the reason why she had it built. Elisa would give me just a simple reply back in Osaka, good enough for an interview. But she would still keep thinking about the true answer to that question long after I had gone. I tried to think about what we would say. It was very difficult to make up such things, but I wanted to try. How long can a building exist? Elisa would say, knowing it was a very unrefined description of what she felt. She wouldn't want it to sound cheap, but she wouldn't be able to find better words right now. You want to know how long it will stay there? Suddenly I realized this thought came almost automatically to me. I imagined it as something I would say to Elisa, but it was also something I have wanted to formulate. Yeah, but no, it's not that. Maybe it's... I'm thinking it can always be destroyed, no? I imagined she would be saying this as we'd walk on. I guess anything can be destroyed. I think so too, even just preserving it. In that state it is now. It's impossible without effort. I would say so. You need to clean the windows, to do maintenance, exchange things, and so on. I imagined myself replying, "The amphitheater we are going to, how long has it stood there?" She would ask me. "I don't really know, I'm sorry." I would reply, a bit nervous that she may think of me as uneducated. "I don't know either, but it's been around much longer than the Umeda building." I stopped. This all felt really terrible. I knew I wanted to dream about something special with Elisa, and I wanted to conclude her story, but the conversations in my head felt really awkward and unnatural. I guess I wanted Elisa to be worried about what it really was she was doing it all for. To what purpose would she be making all her money? The Umeda Sky building would be her first truly remarkable project that the money she made building ships financed. It was the headquarters of her firm, but that could have been achieved with a much less spectacular construction as well. So I guess she felt, at least subconsciously at that time, compelled to create something that would last. Perhaps even very generally trying to see whether a seemingly larger-than-life project would bring her relief from what was bothering her. But it wasn't possible, because anything can disintegrate. Elisa realized that there was nothing she could possibly do that would guarantee that anything she creates would last forever. And it was a simple realization, something that, had I continued my fantasy conversation, would have to be said in such clear words, which would have sounded so shallow, that I, or Elisa, whoever would have said it, would feel embarrassed. And yet, even though it was such a simplified sentence, its general nature was not adopted by Elisa or me. We didn't come across that line, thinking it fitted. We have concluded it from our own thoughts and experiences, and we are both not ashamed and not too proud to admit that we have arrived at a quote that was known by almost everyone: nothing lasts forever. But despite that, it didn't feel shallow, and it didn't feel wrong to experiment with the implications. Elisa's "so I kept on dreaming" would be saddened at first, to realize that nothing she creates is guaranteed to exist in the future, and nothing she does is guaranteed to be remembered. So any achievements she would have made, any good causes she may have contributed to, for all their gratifications, they would always have the potential to not be remembered. And it could also happen in her lifetime. What were all her achievements good if she was alone at the age of 70? And for me, what good would the love of my life be if she died first and I would live on 3 or 4 more years? There would be no rational comfort in me being able to say I had a good life, spent in the company of a woman who truly loved me. At that moment, only that moment would matter. And at that moment she would be dead. It all passed so quickly, me being in my thoughts, walking. I remember I was at the amphitheater, but I was thinking so hard, I felt like I didn't soak in the atmosphere quite as much as I had when I arrived. I didn't want to go back, but I was still angry at myself that I was so deep in thoughts, so much that I would not even register what was around me. I remember saw the azure sea. I remember it was very hot, but it seemed the thoughts about Elisa kept occupying me to the point where the images in my head were stronger than the environment around me, and I hated myself for that. Back in the hotel Nice, falling asleep with my eyes closed, I resolved to go to La Turbie the next day, and force my excitement and happiness to come back. La Turbie. When I arrived in the medieval village the next day, I made a slight detour to climb up a small hill which was overlooking the old town. It said in my travel guide that this would be a nice place to visit, and so I did. It was said to have a great view of Monaco as well, but for that I had to go back and around the main path. I resolved to in fact walk down to Monaco, because I felt I should have spent more conscious time there. But first I wanted to walk a little through La Turbie. Either way, I was happy. My excitement I felt was back, and the surroundings were nothing like I have ever seen. Everything seemed to be so neat, and I could go wherever I wanted to do whatever I wanted to do. When I resolved to leave the small lookout point and go to the south of the village where the stepped hills allow me to see Monaco, I started to think about my story once again, but this time I only wanted it to be romantic. Elisa would have expressed what she felt yesterday, and at the banquet nothing special would happen. But as I would be saying goodbye to her leaving the social event on the cruise ship at the 1 in the morning, thanking her for inviting me, she would ask me whether I have seen La Turbie, and after me saying no, she would say she liked it and that I may want to visit it. But my plane would be leaving the next day, so I would not be able to visit, and that would be the end. I would fly back to Japan, and then years would pass. I would change my job, move to Kyoto, but somehow I would still have that one slight regret at not being able to see La Turbie. Elisa mentioning La Turbie would have been just in passing, as a polite way to end the conversation and the evening with some form of hope for the future. But this village, it would be stuck with me, and I would return to Europe years after for a vacation, and while driving a rental car from Italy to drop it off in Marseille, I would visit Monaco once again, and after that I would arrive up the twisty roads, the summer, the heat, all of it would remind me of the time I spent here, and now I would be back, and finally reach the village that Elisa said I should visit. I imagined myself more confident than the last time I was here. My hair would have gotten more grey. I would be calm breathing the summer air and seeing the beauty of the village that Elisa Monen once mentioned to me. And just as I would be touching the walls to feel the texture of the stones, thinking about how impossible that fantasy would be, there she would appear. Elisa, coming out of one of the houses. I would recognize her in an instant and she would recognize me. She would also be older, and yet, to me, she would appear so beautiful. The only comparison I would be able to come up with would be that she looked like a work of art. The lines of her face, her eyes, reflecting her thoughtful nature, her composure and grace, and the fact that we met here, that something so improbable like this was possible. It implied that everything else was possible too. And so would end my story, my fantasy and daydreams about Elisa Imonen. I decided to end it in letter B, trying as much as I could to pretend to try to feel how it would be, being here with someone I had feelings for. It felt really nice, and the fact that it was noon and the heat was so unbearable that people chose to stay in their homes. It made letter B even more beautiful. More than, I thought, Monaco. I tried to feel as much as I could, trying to stay in my fantasy role as long as I could, and pretend with these surroundings that Elisa and I are taking a walk and talking about everything that was on our minds. Alright, so that's probably the ending that was mentioned on the forum, and actually the guy said this is the end of his story, right? And I'm guessing this is also the end that was mentioned on the forum. I found that game on that, well, the end is told, but you can't actually end the game. So yeah, this is it. Alright, that was Umeda Sky. I think 3 episodes long. No, I know that. I remember. This is the 3rd episode I'm recording right now. So 3 episodes long story, and whoever managed to got with me through the whole, I hope you enjoyed it. And maybe we can see each other in the next game. Bye.